It's safe to assume that James Gunn is very well known for his rather obscure movies. Every film he does, it always seems to be unique in its own way, and he has released another one of those films in The Suicide Squad, which came out a couple of days ago worldwide. So now it's the perfect opportunity to look through all 5 of his movies and rank them, starting from the worst and going to the best. If you have seen his movies, please make sure to put your ranking down below, as I'm interested to see what everyone else says. But without further ado, let's get into it. Easily coming in at 5th and last place is Super. By me saying easily is not saying it's a bad movie. The rating, 65%, is what I give to literally the most average film, and this is definitely one of the weakest out of James Gunn's directed films. It takes an interesting approach to this superhero genre, a more grounded, maybe realistic version, but it came out the same year as Kick-Ass, and that film has much better execution. The story here isn't as good as that film, and some of the directions they take with this one feel really odd and out of place. The cast is absolutely stacked, filled with recognizable actors and actresses who everyone likes, but they're not all really too likable, whether that's the way they're written, the themes feel way too out of place, or just the awkward shifts in tone which makes you hard to really latch on to these characters. In saying that, it also did have its heartfelt moments with Rainn Wilson's likability, but that did not maintain through his character the whole time or through other characters, as overall a lot of them really lacked much depth. Coming in at 4th place is Slither. Now, a lot of people watch horror movies for the scares, some for the horrific scenes that may happen. However, Slither focuses on a very niche subgenre within the horror genre, as it deals with bodily horror more as the main scare factor and contributor, making it into the horror genre. But what they do with that is absolutely horrible, meaning in the best way, because it's clearly what James Gunn was trying to go for. A lot of the practical effects looked great and gross at the same time. In terms of the story, it's, you know, your average, familiar, cliche, zombie-esque story, but just the small changes he has made impacts the execution a lot more in a positive way. It makes for a more unique viewing, especially tying into the other elements he had brought in. I am aware that James Gunn likes to do some horror things, I've heard, but I've never actually seen them too much, but watching this I can see where people say that, and to be honest, it's quite an underrated horror movie. It's definitely one of the better low-budget horror movies I have seen, so if anyone's a big horror fan, check Slither out. Coming in at 3rd place is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now, this film's placement on this list may not shock many. The thing which may shock you is my rating. Now, it's still a very solid rating, but it's definitely lower than what many people would have. The film itself does continue to expand upon its predecessor, which we'll talk about in a bit. It develops the deeper themes more with the characters' depth, their backstory, and when our Guardians are together, they are fantastic. However, that's the problem. For the majority of the film, they're split up into their own groups. It does highlight some strengths in individual characters when they are split up, or mainly Rocket with Yondu, but other characters don't flourish from being separated. The sequel's comedy is as good as Volume 1, with Drax being a standout and the main source of comic relief this time around. But what lets this film down is, as I touched upon, this team being separated, so you don't have their chemistry 24/7, but also, while it does touch on some important themes with Peter Quill and his dad, his real lineage, it's just a very dialogue heavy film, especially that middle portion of it. And as I mentioned, just because they're all split up, some of these characters aren't really too interesting or too compelling when they're by themselves. So if this film didn't split them up, or didn't split them up for as long, this could have been better than its predecessor, as certain characters are improved upon in this film. It's just not the team-up film we had in 2014. Coming in at 2nd place is The Suicide Squad. Just like with his previous work with Marvel, James Gunn does justice to a superhero team-up movie, and in doing so delivers a lot of fun. Gunn is allowed an R rating, which differs this film from the previous work in the genre he has done, with some very gory action and some crude humor. It is a team-up movie, but there doesn't feel like there is one main character. Everyone gets the same amount of screen time and development that they deserve, and thus making for some really good chemistry amongst the whole group. You have your A-star actors like Margot Robbie, Idris Elba and John Cena, But the real standout for me was Danielle Melchior, who played Ratcatcher 2. I probably mispronounced her last name, in fact I definitely did. But she sort of acted as the glue that kept the whole team together. Now, going into this, she was one of the only actresses that I hadn't heard of on the cast list, and she was the biggest surprise by far, becoming a real standout. Now, as we know, which we'll talk about on this list later, James Gunn does love his big CGI creature with limited vocabulary, and King Shark delivers the DC's R-rated version of Groot in a very amusing way. The film does improve upon Suicide Squad from 2016, however, it doesn't need that film to make this film better. It can just stand on its own. It doesn't even need to be connected in with all the other DCEU movies. It's just a fantastic superhero movie on its own and a very enjoyable watch. However, coming in at first place narrowly is Guardians of the Galaxy. Upon its announcement, Guardians of the Galaxy seemed like a massive risk for Marvel to take quite early on in the MCU. There just didn't really seem any factors going in favor of it, you know, taking it to uncharted territory up in space. Characters from the main group contained a talking raccoon, a talking tree, an actor who was considered a loser in Parks and Recs, as well as a former wrestler. The low expectations many had coming into this movie perhaps made this one of the most pleasant surprises in cinema history. The absurdity of all these factors benefits the film. It just allows you to not question some things which may be silly. Not that there's any plot holes or anything, but just a fun journey. James Gunn creates one of the most entertaining superheroes and definitely one of the most unique, with this fantastic character chemistry as well as the hilarious humor. The plot itself is probably one of the weaker aspects of the film, but you really don't notice it at all because these characters are so great together. The comedy's fantastic and the characters are impossible to hate. Underneath all that humor and fun, there are a lot of heartfelt moments which make this film quite an emotional roller coaster at times. So that was my James Gunn ranking. As I said, make sure to leave yours down below. If you want to see my DCEU ranking with the Suicide Squad, I'll leave a clickable card up in the corner here. And as for that video, if you have already watched it, you may have noticed that my rating for the Suicide Squad is different in this video. I talked about it a bit in there. Opinions change over time, and after a couple of days, in fact it was literally about an hour after uploading that video, my opinion for the rating changed. And also I've just been adjusting my rating system a bit, so a lot of ratings I have covered in previous videos of any sorts may have changed. But anyways, yeah, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and please like and subscribe, would really mean a lot. But anyways, I hope to see you in my next video.